I am extremely happy to welcome this gathering to the launching of the book, Language, Culture, and Caribbean Identity. Doctors Jeanette Alsop and John Rickford are two of the linguists who have contributed greatly to the development and enrichment of Creole language studies at the University of Guyana. I remember with nostalgia the 1970s when we moved for the first time to the Turpine campus. And then, with the enthusiasm and commitment of people like Dr. Jeanette Mercurius and others, the fledgling Department of Modern Languages was inaugurated. The fact that we were able to offer courses in Spanish, French, Dutch, Portuguese, Hindi, and Yoruba in those early days was indicative of our need to embrace the concept of a Caribbean identity that defied the barriers of language. Today, that concept is eminently present in the book that is now being unveiled at the Umana, Yana. May I borrow the Akan formula to welcome you one and all to this memorable event. Akwaba. Upon my colleague, Ms. Claudette Thompson, to introduce our guest speaker. Good evening, everyone. Honorable Prime Minister, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor this evening to introduce Dr. Renata Reeves, who is our guest speaker. Dr. Renata Reeves holds a PhD in Language and Literature from the University of Antwerp. She specialized in the Surinamese area of Dutch, with her main discipline being lexicology or lexicography. At present, she's an associate professor of the Anton University of Suriname. There she is the dean of the Faculty of Humanities. She is also in charge of the Master Studies of Dutch at the faculty. In addition, she chairs the spelling committee of the Dutch Language Union in Suriname and the Committee for Doctorates and Honorary Degrees of the Anton University of Suriname. Apart from her thesis on the lexicon of Surinamese Dutch, Dr. Renata Reeves has published articles and books on lexicology and lexicography of Surinamese Dutch. In 1998, she published the WSBN Dictionary of the Surinamese contribution to the Dutch language, a dictionary which was published in Europe in 1999 on the name of WSN, Dictionary of Surinamese Dutch. At the moment, she is completing a bilingual culinary dictionary, Surinamese Dutch Caribbean English, and vice versa. And that is to be published in Suriname this year and next year in English-speaking Caribbean. I now with pleasure to invite Dr. Renata Reeves.
English, Spanish, French, French Creole, Dutch, and Papiamento. The Anglophone Caribbean is perhaps the most sluggish as regards the promotion of lexicography, but there's some very interesting work going on in a few of the English-speaking territories. The Bahamas, for instance, they work on the College of the Bahamas, is spearheading work on a new, revised, and online version of the Dictionary of Bahamian English, first produced by John Holm and Alison Schilling in 1982. Barbados. The Center for Caribbean Lexicography at the University of the West Indies Cape campus is involved in preliminary work on a school edition of the book we all know of Richard Alsop's DCEU, Caribbean Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage. As well, so apart from this school edition, they are also working on a computerization of that work and its supplement, which was published not too long ago, the New Register of Caribbean English Usage, NRCEU. There is also in plan a number of short glossaries that would be aimed at improving the work of both the private and public sectors in Barbados and the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean. In addition, the compilation of the Caribbean Multilingual Dictionary of Music, Dance, Religion, Festivals, and Folklore is in train, along with other joint initiatives which will be mentioned later. Belize. The Belize Creole Project produced its first dictionary of Belizean Creole entitled Creole English Dictionary, English Creole Dictionary in 2007, and the project continues to work further towards the chronicling of Belizean life and culture in future editions. Dominica and St. Lucia, these two islands have both produced dictionaries of French Creole. Dominica, the Creole Anglais English Creole Dictionary in 1991, and St. Lucia, the Mondesier Dictionary of St. Lucian Creole English Creole in 1993, and the Creole Dictionary under auspices of the Ministry of Education in 2001. Trinidad. In 2007, a second edition of the Trinidad and Tobago Dictionary, Kutaila, excuse me if I did not pronounce it well, was published by John Mendes, which provided even more detailed general information on Trinidadian life and culture than the first. In 2008, the Dictionary of English Creole of Trinidad and Tobago appeared. It was published by McGill University Press. There is also work currently being done at an individual level on a revised and online version of the Dictionary of Jamaican English, originally by Cassidy and LePage. The French Caribbean. Work on French Creole dictionaries and glossaries continues in Martinique and Guadeloupe, as well as in France, Guyana, and Haiti, with the work of Jean Bernabe and Raphael Confiant through their research group GIREC in Martinique, Guadeloupe, and French Guyana. Work on Haitian Creole references. Work on Haitian Creole reference works go on in the diaspora and in the United States at the University of Indiana. Spanish Caribbean. A significant amount of work is ongoing in the Spanish Caribbean and on the South American mainland, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, all have very vibrant dictionary projects, as do Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, Peru, and Chile, to name a few. There is a joint initiative between the Center for Caribbean Lexicography at the University of the West Indies at Cape Hill and the Center for Caribbean Lexicography at the University of Costa Rica, who produce companion dictionaries and glossaries. The Dutch Caribbean. In 2008, the University of Suriname published the WSBN, which abbreviation refers to a monolingual Surinamese-Dutch dictionary. Work on Surinamese Dutch and Sranantongo, the English-based Creole of Suriname, is being carried out at the University of Suriname, and there is a collaboration between the Center for Caribbean Lexicography of the University of the West Indies and the University of Suriname to produce bilingual dictionaries. Similarly, in Aruba, Curaçao, and Bonaire, there are continuing efforts to chronicle Papiamento and to make it a recognized language in its own right, as it is already officially used in the school system. In short, Caribbean lexicography is far from dormant, but it needs a boost in the Anglophone Caribbean, where there is little understanding of the fact that it preserves the linguistic heritage of the English-speaking region or of its huge cultural and integrative power in binding that region together. There are, of course, many smaller initiatives being taken in the form of mini dictionaries, glossaries, word lists, and so on in various territories. In fact, if in fact greater efforts were made to unite the entire Caribbean through language via monolingual, bilingual, and multilingual reference work, then the Caribbean would become not only linguistically strong, but culturally so, and in the end, an entity that would be internationally recognized and respected. I thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rees. May I now call on my colleague, Mr. Alan Hussein, to present a review of the book.
Honorable Prime Minister, other distinguished guests, colleagues, first of all, I must say how honored I am to be part of this event this evening, which I would say not only introduces the book, Language, Culture, and Caribbean Identity, but fundamentally pays well-deserved homage to the late Professor Richard Alsop. The connection between an event like this and Professor Alsop is well established. Richard Alsop was a pioneering linguist and a renowned lexicographer. His well-known Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage is his most well-known work, but he had been researching, teaching, and writing about linguistics, and in particular, Caribbean Creole linguistics, even before I was born. I was truly amazed when I discovered this fact many years ago. The connection between Professor Alsop and the volume which is being launched this evening is also beyond question. First of all, the title of the volume is rich with the resonance of his life and work. It excellently summarizes the interests that occupied him during his long and productive life. More than that, the specific words, language, culture, Caribbean identity, and their arrangement brings them into a vibrant confluence. Language, first of all. European languages, and in particular, the Creole languages of the Caribbean, the fantastic product that our foreparents created. Culture, the living matrix in which language is created and which fosters even more language. And Caribbean identity, not just an evolving product, but the very essence of who and what we are and are to be. This volume is edited by two outstanding linguists. First of all, and fittingly, Dr. Jeanette Alsop, who we have here this evening, Professor Alsop's widow, but herself a linguist and a lexicographer of repute. And secondly, Professor John Rickford, one of Professor Alsop's students and a linguist of international standing. The book contains 16 articles, and these present a formidable array of scholarship into Caribbean language, culture, and identity. According to the editor's introduction, the contributors are, quote, Richard's former students, friends, or colleagues, each in their own fields, outstanding contributors to Caribbean linguistics, end of quote. And indeed, they are. The list includes Pauline Christie, Marvin Aline, Walter Edwards, John Rickford, John Simpson, Lise Weiner, Ian Robertson, Velma Pollard, Jeanette Alsop, Claudette Thompson, Helene Zamore, Karen Carpenter, Hubert Devonish, Keane Gibson, Martha Isaacs, Hazel Simmons MacDonald, and someone named Alan Hussein. Since we are largely a Guyanese audience here tonight, I will take the liberty of pointing out the plethora of Guyanese names among this list. 8 of the 17 contributors, Rickford, Edwards, Robertson, Alsop, Hussein, Gibson, Thompson, Devonish, are Guyanese. And this indicates the richness of linguistic scholarship, not only in the Caribbean at large, but the richness of linguistic scholarship that has come out of this country, Guyana. And this is something of which Professor Alsop, himself a Guyanese, would have been very proud. The book itself is slim in appearance, comprising just 174 pages. But this is deceptive, as I soon found out. There is a remarkable depth and variety in this book. Indeed, the authors were able to organize the 16 articles into 6 well-substantiated sections. Sections on Caribbean English, various aspects of Caribbean Creole linguistics, Caribbean lexicography, folklore and religion, music, literature, music and dance, and finally, education. In these sections, one can read about Watamama, Comfa, reduplication, future tense markers, personal pronouns, proverbs, calypso, bilingual education, Afrogenesis, identity construction, literacy, and much more. So in 174 pages, all of those topics and more covered. This volume speaks loudly about the richness of linguistic scholarship in the Caribbean. Anyone who thinks that linguists are just people who can speak many languages needs to dip into this book and see the range of interest and depth of work that linguists do. Across the 6 sections, one finds a satisfying range of articles. The reader can follow the careful examination of specific linguistic elements in the articles of Walter Edwards, Alan Hussein, and John Rickford, can engage in broader evaluations and assessments, such as Marvin Ali's examination of the concept of Creole, and Pauline Christie's evaluation of the future of English in the Caribbean, and Jeanette Alsop's discussion of Caribbean lexicography. The reader can trace the origins and evolution of elements of our folklore in articles such as Ian Robertson's article on Mingi Mama and Keane Gibson's article on Comfa. They can read about research strategies such as Lee Weiner's use of photo illustration techniques. They can read the reports on the outcomes of research, as in Karen Carpenter's and Hubert Definich's article on bilingual education in Jamaica, and Hazel Simmons MacDonald's article on St. Lucian French Creole proverbs. And they can analyze language strategies using Calypso, as in Claudia Thompson's article, and much more. So there's a great range of articles and kinds of articles in these sections, in these 174 pages. Some articles explore origins. They deal with things such as Afrogenesis, Compa, Mindi Mama, Proverbs, and so on. But these things from the past are also shown to have importance for the now and the future. For example, Keen Gibson shows in her article that while the comfort tradition comes from Africa, instead of worshipping only African ancestors, the practitioners in Guyana include ethnicities of the various Guyanese people into Compa. This is a significant and awesome development in the Guyanese context. Other articles examine contemporary problems and situations, and the book ends with two articles on the important question of language issues in Caribbean schools. Many of the themes, topics, issues, problems, and perspectives that we find in the book were raised, explored, or suggested by Richard Alsop more than 50 years ago. This is certainly true for the lexicography articles in the book, but it is also true of the other specific articles on Creole grammar, on linguistic variation, on Afrogenesis, on forms of music, Caribbean folk elements, and other issues. Much of the scholarship in the volume was enabled by the kind of work that Dr. Alsop and other pioneers did more than 50 years ago, and we see that Caribbean linguists are still grappling with these problems up to now. These articles cover a number of topics which keep appearing in discussions among Caribbean people. Discussions that may well be heard not only on university campuses, in lectures or in specialist conferences, but discussions that may be heard on the street. Because the book contains articles that raise questions about Creole language itself, about English, about the way we talk, about connections with Africa, about spirits and zombies, about rites, rituals, and practices, about our music and about our identity, and how to improve literacy and education. This is one of the things that I like much about this book. It is a solid Caribbean artifact. The linguistic thinking, research, insight, and reasoning shown in the articles are impeccable and applicable anywhere. But this book has a special Caribbean resonance. It is like Bob Marley's natural mystic blowing through the air. It seems to arise naturally from what we know, live, think about, experience, and so on. All of the articles are accessible and easy to read, and as is natural in linguistics, there is no shortage of illustrations and data. The coverage focuses mainly on the English Caribbean, but there are at least 3 articles specifically on French Caribbean Creoles. The book is also well structured. It begins with Pauline Christie's well-judged assessment of the future of English in Jamaica, which could be applied word for word to any English-speaking Caribbean country. And this is followed by Morgan Ali's deconstruction of the powerful semantics in the word Creole. These are 2 thought-provoking articles which point to the dialectical tension that underlies discussions about the Caribbean and its development. Is it English or not English? Is the Creole concept demeaning or potentially liberating? In the same way, the articles in the book, while pursuing specific interest in Caribbean language and culture, also echo this tension. Afrogenesis, but uniquely Caribbean. Comfort from Africa, but adopting the ancestors of all Guyanese. Mingi Mama being parallel to the Amerindian stories. The tension between gender and bilingualism in literacy. The skillful exploitation of linguistic tensions in the Calypso, and so on. The gist of these articles open the space for huge questions about Caribbean identity, while at the same time showing glimpses of how this identity has been structuring itself. In this respect, this book shows that linguistics has much to offer in helping us to understand ourselves and also finding the way to ourselves. There is solid linguistics behind language, culture, and Caribbean identity, but it is not just, quote-unquote, a linguistics book. It is a book about how valuable linguistics is to the Caribbean. In a quiet, intrinsic manner, this is a significant achievement. Caribbean linguistics is certainly not for the Caribbean alone. It feeds into the general enterprise of scholars everywhere to understand language, culture, and humanity. But given our particular history and situation in the Caribbean, Caribbean linguistics has an important task of elucidating, supporting, nurturing, promoting, educating, validating, and building. Doing all of this for Caribbean people and non-Caribbean people, but perhaps more so for our own Caribbean people. Language, culture, and Caribbean identity succeeds in doing so. In doing this, and in doing so, it's a fitting tribute to everything that Richard Alsop did and worked for as a scholar.
Thank you very much for an exciting review. I'm sure we will all want a copy of the book. I will now call on Ms. Thompson to introduce the authors.
Again, protocol having been established, I now take the opportunity to introduce a distinguished and my former lecturer, Dr. Jeanette Alsop, who served in Guyana for many years as a teacher at her alma mater, the Bishop's High School, and is a lecturer at the University of Guyana. She is a prolific researcher with a passion for lexicography. Dr. Alsop is currently the Senior Research Fellow in Lexicography at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, where she directs the Center for Caribbean Lexicography that combines Anglophone Caribbean lexicography and multilingual Caribbean lexicography. She is the immediate past president of the Society for Caribbean Linguistics, having served as president and vice president. She earned her PhD from London Metropolitan University and has lectured for years in foreign languages, linguistics, and lexicology, as well as lexicography. At Cave Hill, she has developed undergraduate as well as graduate courses, MA and PhD in lexicography. Dr. Alsop is the recipient of the prestigious international EUROLEX, European Association for Lexicography, Verbatim Award, 1991, for the pursuit of scholarship in lexicography. She is the compiler of the first, and so far, only Caribbean multilingual dictionary. The first volume being on flora, fauna, and foods in English, French, Creole, and Spanish. She is currently compiling a second volume of the multilingual dictionary, which will chronicle Caribbean music, dance, religion, folklore, and festivals. Dr. Alsop is also the current consultant on Caribbean English for the third edition of the Oxford English Dictionary. Professor Alsop Her deceased husband happened to be the first.
Edited by Professor John Rickford and myself in honor of the work of my late husband, Professor Richard Alsop, author of the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage, and certain other publications that I will mention as I go along. But my first duty this afternoon, without preempting the appreciation that will be given later by Mr. Philip Alsop, my brother-in-law, it is my duty to say thank you, a very big thank you, to the Minister and Ministry of Culture and Youth for hosting this launch, for giving me the opportunity to launch the book here. And I must name a few people: Dr. James Rose and the members of his staff who undertook the planning for the launch. Special mention to my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Renata Willis, who, as soon as I told her that I was launching the book here in Guyana, said, "I am going to come." And I said that would be wonderful. And immediately roped her into doing what she did for you today, by talking about the state of Caribbean lexicology in the 21st century. Special thanks to her. Special thanks also to Ms. Claudia Thompson for her wonderful and gracious introduction, and also to Dr. Jocelyn Long, who at short notice consented very graciously too to chair the proceedings, which should have been chaired by my brother Archbishop Dr. Cecil Mercurius, who was to travel with me to Guyana to chair the sessions, but who, because of some health challenges that surfaced at the last minute, could not make the trip. So a great thank you to Dr. Long. Thanks also to Mr. Philip Alsop, my brother-in-law, who will give the vote of thanks later, and to all the contributors to the volume, including Amin Hussein, who did such a wonderful job of the review just now. So my deep gratitude goes to all of them. And now it is my pleasant duty to give you an idea of why I decided that the book had to be written and how I went about doing it. Now, I must also apologize too for the absence of my co-editor, Professor John Rickford of Stanford University, who could not be here today because he has made several trips overseas this year, including one to Guyana earlier in the year and one to Barbados. But he has other travel commitments which prevented him from returning to Guyana at this time, and so with great regret he told me to go ahead and do the launch. So on his behalf, I would also like to speak and to say thank you to him for accompanying me on this journey of producing the book. The book celebrates the work of Richard Alsop, as you have been so eloquently told by Alan Hussein, compiler of the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage, the new Register for Caribbean English Usage, which appeared posthumously in 2010, the Book of Afro-Caribbean Proverbs, and which also includes those publications, are not the only ones. These publications include the Edgar Mitterholzer lectures, which he will deliver here in Guyana at the end of the 80s, numerous book chapters, conference papers, speeches, and journal articles. He was also the recipient of a special Guyana Prize for the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage. Now, as I said, the book had to be written, but this book is not the first initiative that was taken to celebrate Richard's work. About 2 years after the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage appeared in 1996, Ian MacDonald, in collaboration with Wanda Rancic and Ian Robertson, our dear colleague who recently retired from the University of the West Indies in the Gustin campus, put together a special volume of the journal Kike Overall, which has been bequeathed to us by our great literary hero, Arthur Seymour, and invited the Guyanese linguists to write tributes to Richard, which would make up that volume, and which we did. But that celebrated his work specifically in lexicography, whereas language, culture, and Caribbean identity completes the tribute and includes all the strands of his life's work and academic interests in one volume. And as you were told, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, each section of the book represents an aspect of his work: Caribbean English, the learning and teaching of it, how it impacted the classroom, and so on and so forth, Creole linguistics, Caribbean lexicography, Caribbean folklore and religion, Caribbean literature, music and dance, and of course, the burning problem of language issues in schools, which are constantly being referred to and lamented over, and are being carried into tertiary institutions as well as into the workplace. And this is happening all over the English-speaking Caribbean, certainly. You can hear it from Guyana right through to Belize, that the quality of English is dropping, that children don't know how to write standard English, etc., etc. And of course, there are reasons for that. But I want to move on from there to look at the book both as an informative reader and the text. As you heard from Adam, the book covers a range of topics and is a very informative book, not only for linguists or for people who specialize in language, but also for the general public. There are articles that the general reader can read and enjoy and get a lot of information from in the book without getting tied up into the scientific aspects of linguistics and so on. So that is one, I would say, of its pluses. The other aspect of the book is that it is also a textbook. Now, there is a program, a new master's program that we started to offer at UWI in Barbados during this past academic year, 2012-2013, called the MA in Caribbean Studies, which has a language stream, a linguistic stream, and a literature stream. And language, culture, and Caribbean identity is a required text in a course that I teach called Caribbean Linguistic and Cultural Identity. And the students have found the book very helpful to them and very interesting. So the book has a dual effect. And again, to repeat what Adam said, but I think I need to repeat this, that about half the contributors to the book are Guyanese linguists. And this is nothing that happened by chance, because when I was choosing the authors who would make up the book, I was very careful to choose people who had been literature students, friends, and colleagues, or all three. And naturally, those would have included almost all of us who wrote in Kike Overall in 1998. And the rest of the authors were chosen from the Caribbean. My former lecturer, Professor Morgan Aline, who did such a wonderful job of looking at Creole in depth and its connotations, what it means in terms of culture, and so on. Pauline Christie, who was a senior lecturer in linguistics at the UWI Mona campus for many years and did a lot of work on Dominican and French Creole. People like John Simpson, who is the editor of the third edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, which I'm Caribbean English consultant. He was also the editor of the second edition, to which Richard was Caribbean English consultant. Louise Weiner, who did a huge volume entitled Dictionary of the English Creole of Trinidad and Tobago. And then, of course, we have people like Karen Carpenter, who trained the word devilish, a number of our outstanding guidance in this, to write on the whole question of gender in relation to language and how we have to look at the performance and measure it according to the types of results that you will get depending on the gender. So the book is indeed a rich mix, but I'm very happy that many of the contributors are Ghanaians in this. Now, coming to the whole question of Caribbean linguistic and cultural identity, and of course, the unique nature of Caribbean people and cross-Caribbean integration, I would say that we need to address the whole question of both Caribbean linguistic and cultural identity. We need to continue to address it because it is vital to the understanding of Caribbean people about themselves, where they have come from and where they are going. It is only that understanding and that awareness of the unique nature of Caribbean people and the fact that they are one people forged out of many that will really promote true integration in the region. And when I say true integration, I mean across the entire Caribbean, crossing the language barriers, because I'm a multilingual lexicographer, and not concentrating on the Anglophone Caribbean, which is definitely, and this might shock you, in the minority, with only just over 6 million speakers in relation to the Hispanophone Caribbean, with well over 51 million Spanish speakers, and the French Caribbean with at least 20 million French and French Creole speakers. But the major official languages of the Caribbean are not all that we need to be concerned about. There is the fourth official language of the Caribbean, Dutch, spoken in Suriname and the other Dutch territories, which should also be included. It is for this reason that I am very pleased, again, that my friend and colleague, Dr. Renata Davies, is here tonight to participate in this program and to give a new and relatively unknown dimension to the work that we have are doing and that we have undertaken in the form of a joint bilingual Caribbean English to English Dutch project. Now, it is for this reason, you might say, why multilingual lexicography? But it was for this reason that Richard also, in his wisdom and in his vision of a truly integrated Caribbean, recognized that the chronicling of Caribbean English was only the beginning of the work to be done, and urged me to begin multilingual work involving at least the three major official languages of the Caribbean, as well as French Creole, hence my supplement to the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage, and the subsequent compilation of the Caribbean Multilingual Dictionary, which is done in themes because of the huge volume of material. And I started with flora, fauna, and foods as the most productive aspects of the lexical sector with regard to everyday existence, and which I'm following up with music, dance, religion, festivals, and folklore in the second volume. Within these areas or lexical domains are a number of subdomains, and there's a vast amount of work to be done in the form of glossaries of various kinds, monolingual, bilingual, and multilingual. And in addition to everything else, lexicography is not just the production of dictionaries, glossaries, and other reference works, as we call them, but contributes to the education of language teachers and students, indeed all teachers and students, because it is the chronicling of your whole culture, your language and your entire culture, on how knowledge can be applied, particularly in language teaching, how the Caribbean Creoles and non-standard dialects came about, why they came about, where they came from, and it also gives insights into why certain patterns persist in the children speaking and writing when everybody, at least in the Anglophone Caribbean, is supposed to speak English, quote unquote. Furthermore, the actual awareness of local Caribbean labels for everyday items of flora, fauna, foods, music, dance, folklore, festival, religion, etc., will demonstrate to students and teachers alike that we can speak about our Caribbean reality using Caribbean terms, and that we can include these terms in our Caribbean texts, thus making them more culturally relevant and realistic to our students. But we cannot only look at lexicography in print. We have to look at the trends that are overtaking, and so we have to look at digitization. And I've already been in discussion with Dr. Didacus Jules, the registrar of CXC, about producing a whole database of Caribbean lexicography, Anglophone and multilingual. And I have in train a project put up by two young MPhil PhD students in computer science to start by computerizing the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage and a new register of Caribbean English Usage. So there is a whole lot of work to be done. But in order to spread lexicography, spread knowledge about lexicography, make people understand better what it involves, that despite Richard's reluctance to consider the idea of teaching lexicography, and his actually warning me that I should not teach and do professional lexicography, I have introduced the courses from undergrad to PhD level at the University of the West Indies State Hill campus. I have found that this is the only way that people can begin to understand the importance of lexicography in the Anglophone Caribbean. Because, make no mistake, it is very well understood in the Francophone and Hispanophone Caribbean, for example. And I know that Dr. Denise is doing her best to make it understood and valued in the Dutch Caribbean. Now, these courses are very well received by students who have begun to look at themselves in a slightly different light and to value their own language varieties and the names that they give to things with much greater awareness. The required texts for these courses are, of course, the Dictionary of Caribbean English Usage and the Caribbean Multilingual Dictionary. And I am happy to say that I already have 2 MA graduates and 1 PhD graduate who has contributed to the volume, Dr. Hélène Zamor, and she's written on French Caribbean music and culture. 2 more MAs and PhD students following, plus 2 MPhil students who will go on to PhD degrees. And this is one very important part of the work of the Center for Caribbean Lexicography, which I currently direct, but with my retirement on the doorstep, a new team must be trained to take over the day-to-day work, even though I still have plenty of work to finish myself. And at this point, I'm happy to say that one of my current PhD students, Mr. Rommel Springer, is now pursuing research into the names of medicinal plants in sections of Region 4 in Guyana, inspired by my own work on flora as well as the work of my brother, Archbishop Peturius, who did a full volume on the medicinal plants of Guyana, but which is not yet published, and we're looking to try to publish that. Mr. Springer has already paid a visit to Guyana, a preliminary visit at my urging, and has been able, through my brother, to be introduced to some of the herbalists working in the field. Now he's going to return in July and spend a longer time, about 5 weeks between July and August. And so I am appealing to those of you who have already met him and those of you who have not yet met him to support him and the work because it is invaluable to Guyana, to the Caribbean, and to the world. As we know, more and more people are turning towards alternative medicine, alternative remedies, and so what were once regarded as old wives' tales are not necessarily any longer so. And so this is a way of looking linguistically at the labeling of these items. As I close, I would wish for the current research to be met with less resistance in the Anglophone Caribbean. I pray that that resistance, which as both Richard and I have experienced even among colleagues, that resistance would become less and less as people become more enlightened. And I would also hope that the reluctance to give support, both moral and financial, and I know that to say financial under the current economic conditions may be to rub people a little the wrong way, but we don't look for large sums. We could go bit by bit. But what we need is the willingness to support the work and to recognize that it is of value so that we can preserve both our linguistic and our cultural heritage. Heritage studies are now at the forefront of Caribbean research, and this should be so because who does not want to know where he or she came from, why you're here, where you're going? Maybe there are people who don't, but certainly this is the new trend, and it is a worthwhile one. So as the work extends and expands, we have to realize more and more how immeasurable is our debt to Richard also for having had the vision, the foresight, the ability, the determination, and the courage to start and continue this work as far as he was able. And I regard it as my sacred duty to continue to carry it on as long as I can, and to keep guiding the students that I have into the path so that they develop the same passion that Richard and I had, because they are the future. So without further ado, I would say that I ask for your support in principle, morally, and I thank you for your patience in listening to me.
To do the launch. Probably because it's the simplest of tasks. But I like to find deeper reason than that. And I must, because of the privilege I've had to sit among in this August group. And so I've been searching for reason. I'm not quite sure I found, but I will engage you in my search. Dr. Rose asked me to do the launch. Disappeared and told me nothing else. Wasn't quite sure what was meant by doing the launch. But then it occurred to me that he was asking me to do it in the stead of the Minister of Culture, who would normally do such a launch. And I think the reason why he asked me is because he knows that I lack the ambition, and the Minister will not be challenged. But more than that, Dr. Rose, as a UG person, would have recognized that what we are in fact launching is a work of the University of Guyana. But how do I lay that claim? I lay that claim because the main authors, the editors of this book, in the main have their origins in the University of Guyana. Dr. Alsop, who just spoke and with us, may recall, had her beginnings at UG in the early days, in the night school. And if my memory is correct, Professor Rickford, when I was but an accounts clerk at the University of Yana, was himself a lecturer at the University of Yana. But that's not all. We've already been told how many of the authors are from, if not still at, the University of Yana. So indeed, we can lay claim to this book as having its origin in the University of Yana. And so gradually I get some standing to be in the gallery. But as I gave more thought to the question, and I looked at the title of the book, I got my layman standing. Because this book is about culture. In fact, language is the custodian of culture in its totality, while at the same time being the component of culture. And so much of what language seeks to address is in fact about people like me, the layman, their use or misuse of language. And so in a sense, we all have some ownership of this work. It's not a work from heaven. It's a reflection of our reality. But the book also speaks to identity. And that came home very, very strongly to me. A recollection, an experience I had in Africa as a young man in 1975. Being a Georgetown boy, growing up in a house where my sisters are speakers of Dutch as the first language, and English as the second language, so they learned it perfectly. Never really entertained too much of my wrong English. So I was always told to speak proper English. And when you live in Georgetown and you're told to speak proper English, it means you must speak Creolese as well. But I went to Africa, and a secondary school student asked me what was my mother tongue. And I very proudly at that time said English. And he said, no, excuse me, sir, we all speak English. What is your mother tongue? Immediately, I recognized the value of Creolese. Not only for the purpose of communicating, but for the purpose of identity. And so this book brings that home to me, that language has a lot to do with identity. And in this whole question of the issues, the last part of the book, we must seriously address the question of the role of Creolese from the standpoint of the Guyanese and the Caribbean identity. It's not just a matter of people not knowing English. It's a matter of why they don't, what we should do to make them know it. But what is it they seem to know naturally and they seem to go with naturally? And so this title, Caribbean Identity, Language, Culture, and Caribbean Identity, is extremely relevant at this time to the realities of the Caribbean. And those of us at the university are very proud that we have laid the foundation for such a study to have taken place And that we still have in our midst persons who will obviously carry on the work and that has begun, some of whom are contributors to this book. And we feel that it's a great privilege to have such a book dedicated to one of the late Guyanese, Professor Alsop. It's probably ironical that Alsop is A, but the Alsops are A to Z, because they traverse from engineering in the person of our good friend who is present, Mr. Alsop, to linguistics. So we have A to Z Alsops, who made significant contribution and continue to do so to the development not only of linguistics, but the development of Yana, and more generally, the development of culture, culture itself being all of life. And therefore, notwithstanding being the layman, notwithstanding being overwhelmed by the occasion and the company, notwithstanding not being able to stand in the step of the minister for the want of ambition, the pleasure is indeed mine to do the simplest task, to launch this book and to claim it on behalf of those who wrote it, on behalf of the university, on behalf of Yana, and indeed on behalf of the entire Caribbean. Thank you.
We have listened to the insights given us into the preparation, meticulous work, and the long hours spent on producing this text. We've heard Mr. Alexander tell us about the value of this text for all in the Caribbean. This text is right here on the table, and I'm sure that you will be happy to acquire a copy for yourselves. I now call on Dr. Alsop to present the legal posits and to follow up with a signing ceremony of language, culture, and Caribbean identity.
We were just about to misplace me again. I'm not going to let it happen the second time. So I'm asking the librarian of the University of Guyana to come forward and participate in this process.
It's my pleasure and privilege to hand over 2 copies of Language, Culture, and Caribbean Identity to the University of Guyana, and more specifically to the librarian of the University of Guyana. And I'm very happy to be able to do so. And at this point in time, I must make a quick comment, and that is I was looking at your list of publications that you had about Caribbean lexicography, and I have some papers to send you that would fill out that list. So, without further ado, I'm going to make a presentation.
There's a little whispered conversation here, and we want to ask Honorable Prime Minister if he would care to make a few comments. May I invite you to come up?
very much for Chair Lady, Professor Locke, others at the table, our professor from Suriname, University of Suriname, Professor Alsop, Thompson, my erstwhile colleague in that Parliament building, Mr. Vincent Alexander, and the other gentlemen, with many ladies and gentlemen. I say that in memory of a gentleman who nearly 50 years ago had me for 1 month saying le plancher, le plafond, and le mur. So it's good to be here to join in recalling Professor Richard Alsop and his contribution to Guyana and the Caribbean. I remember him also playing, I think it was badminton, some game with shuttlecock, so out in the dining hall. I certainly agree that even though I may be like Philip, an engineer, and maybe more wanting to give praise to things technical, mathematical, engineering, and so on, I want to agree that issues of language and all that's implied in the language that we use and culture are very important and maybe constitute our identity, or is evidence of our identity, what can be seen of us. And for us in the Caribbean, whose ancestors were thrown together here some not so long ago, historically speaking, they would be issues of identity. I want to commend all the good work that is being done, but I would like to challenge, without a challenge that can be extended, particularly thinking of the situation of our own country, Guyana, but also neighboring Suriname, and maybe even, and particularly to Trinidad, because it has been something that I've been thinking of, that particularly because language is so important in identity, and there is much more transmitted as we speak than the specific words. I'm thinking that we need to extend this sort of work to include our people descending from those who came from Asia, from India, and from China, and also, in our case, our local Amerindian persons. For I do believe that even though the population, members of the population may feel that politicians just can't get on, or they may be close to being devil, when we look at what's the kind of intensity of disagreements in Trinidad recently, when we look at those things, it lends me more to the feeling that our differences in language between our different groups of peoples in our countries, Guyana, Trinidad, and I may make bold in the presence of the professor from Suriname to say also Suriname, that these differences are maybe quite germane to the differences we see in our political positions. Maybe there are differences in political positions that are reflections of what the differences in the language we speak, because we do speak different languages. We do speak different languages. We don't even speak the same English words the same way. And the connotations and the stories behind each of the words we speak are quite different. I am aware of that because maybe of my own peculiar history growing up in a Canadian mission school, an institution also present in Trinidad. Interestingly, we had recently a magazine issued in Yana, I think entitled The Portuguese People, something with a Portuguese name, I think, word there. So I'd like to call for an extension of the good work being done that largely relates the African, what was brought here in this Corinthian from Africa and its interaction with Europe, to extend it to include our other groups of people who are here. I find it very interesting to hear at this time many of our Amerindian people speaking, and it has a different, interesting way, because quite often they are speaking in the particular idioms of their language, and I hope I got the word right. I see Mr. Diana, none of my old teachers, looking on here at me, and he still wanted to mark me from the early 50s. But when I hear some of our Amerindian people speak English, I have no doubt they're speaking in the idioms of the particular tribal language, English words. They put the English words to the idioms of the particular tribal language. And I do believe that you don't speak the same language, you may speak the same words, and there were differences and there were difficulties in reaching agreement. Certainly we don't socialize, and again I think the socialization will move apart again because the words connote and encourage different responses in our different people. So this is a challenge I would like to put out, that we move from this strong base, we move outwards from this strong base. I thank you very much.
For yet another insight coming from the angle of the engineer, the scientist, and so on. If you permit, I think Dr. Bunsell would like to address some of the suggestions. Thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister, I'm very pleased to hear you say what you said, because the Center for Caribbean Lexicography already has a large collection of Indic and Amerindian items. Some of the items were collected by Stuart Thompson and her counterpart, Koji Ramda, who for years worked as research assistants at the University of Guyana, helping what was then the Caribbean Lexicography Project to gather all these items. And in my own work on identity, I point out that there's a whole range of work that needs to be done on these other ethnicities, Asian, Amerindian, and so on. So I would like to set your mind at rest about that, and I would also like to invite you once more to the podium to accept a copy of Language, Culture, and Caribbean Identity. And I should like